Good morning. We'd like to call our meeting to order, please. I'm Mark Harrison. I'm the first vice president. Tom Van Fossen, our president, is traveling today. I think he escaped over the border to Canada for a few days, so we're hoping they'll let him come back in. So I would like to, first of all, we'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody would rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Alan Prather, if you'd lead us in the pledge to the Texas flag.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one nation.
Marshall Scanlon, if you'd lead us in the affirmation to the SAR, please.
We descendants of the heroes of the American Revolution, who have sacrificed to establish the United States of America, reaffirm our faith and constitutional principles, and solemnly pledge ourselves to defend there against every foe.
We'd like to have our song leader lead us in the country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing, land under my father's flag, land with the pilgrim's pride, from every mountain side, let freedom. Chaplain Pounders, if you would lead us in the invocation, please.
Join me for just a moment. God, we are here searching for you, searching for your message for us today. We know that that message was given to those patriots who established this nation so many years ago. And we know that you were with us again today. And as we acknowledge your presence, we determine in our hearts to do everything that we can do to continue this liberty, this freedom, this joy that we have in the nation of freedom in the world. Amen.
Amen. You may be seated.
Let's have just a moment of silence and keeping for the compatriots who have passed away, Monty Monzingo and Bill Bellamy, who had been dual members of this chapter for a number of years. And likewise, we lift up our prayers for Ralph McDowell and his wife. Thank you.
Thank you. You may be seated. We're honored to have a number of guests here with us today. Even with the rain, it, I think, held down attendance somewhat. We do have, from a state standpoint, we have our state chaplain, Frank Pounders, here with us today. We have District 6 Vice President Gary Lovell with us in the back. I believe that is all of our state officers and district officers that we have today. So I know we have a number of new members being inducted, and they have some guests. Jerry, do you want to have them introduce their guests at the time of induction? Jerry, do you want to have the guests introduce the new members inducted?
Sure, I had everybody here.
Okay.
We have 9 new members and families.
Okay, and we'll be introducing those in a few minutes as we do swear them in, and they have guests with them too, so do appreciate you being here. I would like to introduce our speaker today. John Burhoe is here. He's a graduate of Yale and with a master's in business from Pepperdine. He is a former naval officer and airline executive for both Continental and American Airlines. Although he is retired, he is an active partner in 3 companies and sits on the Cure PSP National Board as Chairman Emeritus. He talks on a variety of military history and national history topics today. We've asked him to come in and talk a little bit about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and given all the tension in the world today, that seems especially timely at this point. So, John, I'd like to have you come up, and I know you have a couple of guests with you, if you could introduce them too.
Morning.
Good morning.
I have 2 guests here, Jim O'Connor and Ken Cordier. Jim,
Need to get a little closer to that mic, or they get up right.
I don't know if I could get much closer. Jim, Ken, and I are all members of an organization called Roaring Lambs. I don't know if you ever heard of that. We have a Bible study every Sunday morning at a golf club where they go through the Bible almost word for word. It takes about 10 years to go through it once. The group's on their 3rd time through it now, going up on 40 years. Ken, particularly I should note, is a colonel from the Air Force, retired F-4 pilot who was a guest in the Hanoi Hilton for about just short of 7 years. And I'm sure he'll probably be speaking here in the future. And so if you want to meet he or Jim, please do so. Oh, I can't see the screen.
Yeah, I think Jim is our counsel of spiritual life.
You pay your dues?
Did I pay my dues? Well, the dues I paid is I was 4 years in the Navy. I was right in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was operations officer on the ship which would have controlled the landing into Cuba. And when it was called off, it was a day and a half away. So it was very close. One of the things we didn't know at the time was that the Russians not only had tactical missiles operational, but what we didn't know is they had nuclear warheads on them. So had that taken place, I probably would not be standing here today. So that was close. Let me move forward a little bit so I can see the screen.
Let me check something.
I can move it.
There you go.
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay, and just
Let me check the volume. Let me check the volume. It's about as high as it's going to go.
He's straightening my tie right now. Is this the button here for... This changes the slides?
No, I've got you over here. You'll just tell me when to change them, and I'll change them for you.
I like to start with this. This was the first line of a poem that I wrote on the birth of our first son. The title is, the first line is, "Are days you remember, moments frozen in time." And clearly one of those for all of us was, where were you when President Kennedy was shot? I think everybody in this room who was alive at that time could tell you exactly where and when and what they saw and heard. In our case, we had just come from the doctor's office and found out that we were pregnant with our first son. Came out all giddy, excited. Went to the supermarket, stopped, got something to eat out of the supermarket, came back, got in the car, turned on the radio, and there it was. President Kennedy had been shot. So that was our story.
Just tell me.
Everybody in here can tell exactly where you were and what you were doing if you were alive at that time when you heard that news. This is not only about what I was asked to talk about, which is the Cuban Missile Crisis, but this is about basically not only Kennedy's life, but the life of the Kennedy family, which is filled with high points and quite a few low points too. But basically, the truth about Kennedy is sometimes gallant, sometimes very disturbing. But the bottom line is how he was murdered, and that's what it was, is really atrocious. Is that clear? Is that?
Yeah, it's the angle.
Okay, because it looks very...
It is, it's the angle.
But this comes from a book called Killing Kennedy by Bill O'Reilly. I don't know if anybody's read that book, but this is in essence a synopsis of what took place in that book. Is it clear to everybody there? It's very, very weird to hear. Okay. First thing I want to talk about is the similarities between Kennedy and Lincoln. Lincoln was elected, well, I wish I could see that better.
Yeah. 1860.
In 1860. Kennedy was elected in 1960. Both were assassinated on a Friday with their wives. Each was succeeded by a Southerner named Johnson. Andrew Johnson was born in 1808. LBJ was born in 1908. Each had a death of a child in office. If you remember, Kennedy's son died when he was in office. Booth was shot inside a theater, fled to a storage facility. Oswald was shot in a storage facility and fled to inside a theater. Now, you can't make that kind of stuff up. This is the Kennedy family portrait. Joe Sr. was a pretty interesting character. How many of you are familiar with Joe Sr.? He was ambassador to England at one time, was actually quite a big fan of Hitler's. But he was also made his fortune during the Depression bootlegging booze. And so he was quite an interesting character. He was closely associated with the mob because of his time running booze. He had one daughter who he had lobotomized because she was somewhat retarded. And he was a dictator, a complete control over the Kennedy family. Jack Kennedy grew up in a privileged atmosphere. He, at a young age, moved to California, where he had a roommate. Can anybody tell me who that roommate is? It's Robert Stack. And apparently Jack Kennedy and Robert Stack cut quite a swath through the ladies in Hollywood at that time. And the war came. Brother Joe, the older brother, went off to Europe as a B-24 pilot. Jack ended up in Washington in quite a cushy job. And he was continuing his escapades that he started in California and was dating everybody. One of the ladies he dated was a very close sympathizer to Adolf Hitler. And Joe Kennedy Sr. got wind of this and was pretty unhappy, and he figured he better get Jack out of Washington. So he did. And Jack went off to the Pacific, commanding a PT boat, PT 109. I think you've all heard that story. Joe, his brother, just to continue back this, his brother at the time was a B-24 pilot in England, and he volunteered for a special mission. And that mission was to take a B-24 four-engine bomber fully loaded with explosives, with only one person on board, he, the pilot, and to fly that to a certain point close to Scandinavia, where the German submarine pens were, then bail out, and the plane would have then been radio controlled in to crash and explode into the German submarine pens. One big problem was the plane exploded before he bailed out, prematurely exploded. So Joe Kennedy, who was the heir apparent, the favored son, was no longer. Now the second one, the kind of a ne'er-do-well, Jack Kennedy, was now the heir apparent. And Joe Kennedy Sr. had tremendous plans for his boys. And he ran that household. Jack Kennedy, as you know, in PT 109, was out on a patrol one time. A Japanese destroyer came out of nowhere in the middle of the night, cut his PT boat straight in half. So there they were, sitting out. 2 or 3 of them were killed, and the rest of them somehow found their way to this little deserted island, where they were for a number of days. Nobody even knew they were there. Then Jack took it upon himself to wade to a nearby island at low tide, found there a native, and he took a coconut, and he carved on the coconut. I can't read that. Can you read that from there?
I'll read that. It says, Nauru Island Commander, native nose post. He can pilot, 11 alive, needs small boat, Kennedy.
And somehow that found its way back to the Allies, and they came and Kennedy was rescued. Otherwise, they'd probably still be on that island. So, as I talked about, heir apparent Joe Kennedy, that's a B-24 bomber, and it's no more. So in 1946, Jack came back, and as a Kennedy family, Joe was very, very prominent in Massachusetts. He was elected to the House of Representatives and served there. He married Jackie, and he served in the House until 1950, where he was elected to the Senate from Massachusetts. And then, of course, there in 1960, he was elected president at 43 years old. Everybody, how many were alive during that time? Almost everybody. That famous speech, ask not what you can do for your country, ask what you can do, your country, no, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Issues at that time were several. He was succeeding Dwight Eisenhower as president. Dwight Eisenhower referred to him as Little Boy Blue, by the way. He had very low regard for him. Issues were time was Fidel Castro in Cuba. Vietnam was starting to rear its head. The mafia was, as it has before and still is, very strong. The Cold War with Russia, and of course the Civil Rights Movement. So he had quite a plate full. And he ended the presidency really very unprepared for it at 43 years old. his rival was, for the nomination in 1960, was Lyndon Johnson. And the Johnsons and the Kennedys had no regard for each other at all. And to win the presidency, there were two key states that Kennedy must carry. One was Illinois, and Joe Kennedy had kind of taken care of that because Joe was very close to the mob, the mafia, and they were in Chicago, and they delivered Illinois for the Kennedys. Then there was Texas. In order to take Texas, he felt he had to put Lyndon Johnson on the ticket, even though he did so holding his nose. The Johnsons and the Kennedys had very low regard for each other. But the two things worked, and they were elected to the presidency. A quick move forward, and I'll get back to this, is come the next election, 1964, it would have been a little different because Kennedy was assured, literally assured of re-election. So they didn't need Johnson. Bobby Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson didn't dislike each other. They hated each other. And the plan was that in 1964, the ticket would be Kennedy and Kennedy. And Lyndon Johnson, of course, would be out. Now keep this in mind, because Lyndon Johnson had a fervent desire to be President of the United States. And had 1964 come, his chances would have been totally lost simply because he would not have been on the ticket as vice president. Bobby Kennedy would have been. So 2 and 2 are there. Now whether it made 4 or not, we'll get to that in a little later. But Kennedy, Johnson was the butt of a running joke in the White House. Anybody ever heard of Fiddle and Faddle? Fiddle and Faddle were the names of the staff, many of the staff in the White House at the time. Most of them were young, most of them were very attractive, and there was something they had at noontime, not every day, but almost every day, which they called pool time, where the fellows would go in and swim in the White House pool. The interesting thing is that Fiddle and Faddle and all of them were invited to come as well, and I guess you could say dress was optional. So you draw your own conclusion of what was going on in there. But the White House swimming pool was locked during those times. The mob. Frank Sinatra and Jack Kennedy were very close for a long period of time. As you can see in the picture in the upper left, Sinatra hosted Kennedy many, many times in California. And that was a very close relationship, and all of a sudden that relationship ended. And the reason it ended is that Sinatra was very closely connected to the mob. As you see down below there, Sam Giancana. And Judith Campbell down at the bottom there. Judith was one of the mob ladies, and apparently she and Jack Kennedy had something going as well. And of course you know about Marilyn Monroe. But there sits J. Edgar Hoover, who's the head of the FBI, looking down upon all this with quite disregard. And it reached a point where Sinatra was pushed to the side because he was too much of a liability because of his relationship with the mob. So Sinatra up until then was very close to the Kennedys, and all of a sudden he was on the outside looking in. And he didn't appreciate that. Bay of Pigs. How many remember the Bay of Pigs? Early in his presidency, Kennedy authorized a plan that had been developed by Allen Dulles under Eisenhower, where a group of insurgents, Cuban insurgents, would invade Cuba, and they would be backed up by a force of World War II B-25s flown by Cubans that would come in and provide close air support for the landing. And it was scheduled. And the landing took place, and the planes were late. The reason they were late, as I understand it, and there's controversy on this one, is they took off from an island far to the west of Cuba. And they were to take off at 7 o'clock and be over the landing area at 8 o'clock to provide bombing and close air support. What they didn't take into place was that takeoff point was in a different time zone. So when they took off at 7 o'clock in Cuba, it was 8 o'clock. So when they got over the landing area, it was about 9 o'clock. And the Cuban invasion force had been slaughtered because they didn't have any close air support. I believe that story to be true, but I can't verify it. But Kennedy blamed Dulles for that, Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles blamed Kennedy because he felt that Kennedy had taken over the planning and left him out of it. What the real story is, we'll probably never know. But anyways, the Bay of Pigs was a complete unmitigated disaster. And what resulted out of that, go ahead. I think I covered all this in the previous slide. Go ahead. Next. Pardon me, I'm looking at that at an angle, and it's very difficult for me to read.
If you don't pause for a second, let me get a box or something to raise this up.
But one of the things that came out of that is Fidel Castro was hopping mad at the Kennedys. And the distrust and the hate there grew to epidemic proportions. Yeah, the top is still a little fuzzy, but the bottom paragraphs are fine. The top paragraph is fuzzy.
It's angled.
It needs to be
Anyways, Castro was, at that time, the distrust and the hatred between the Kennedys and the Castros reached a crescendo. And a side product of that was Khrushchev sitting there watching this out from Russia. He viewed Kennedy as a weak, inept president. And that vision of Kennedy by Khrushchev was very key in Khrushchev making the decision to put tactical nuclear missiles in Cuba, which resulted in the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I'll get to. But had Kennedy not been so weak at that first point, there is question as whether Khrushchev would have even considered putting missiles in Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis. I can speak to this with some authority as I was operations officer on a destroyer escort that was based in the Caribbean at the time as part of the amphibious ready squadron in the Caribbean. In the middle of one night, I was sound asleep. I was operations officer. The messenger came down and said, "Mr. Burhoe, we just got a flash message." Anybody know what a flash message is? Flash is wartime. I said, "You got a what?" Went up, decrypted the message. And basically what it said is that there was now hard photographic evidence that the Russians had missiles being operationalized, tactical nuclear missiles in Cuba. And our instructions were to backload. We were carrying Marine Recon and Navy UDT, a fragment. Plus we were anti-submarine destroyer escort, World War II destroyer escort. Get underway immediately, flank speed, steam independently, flank speed due west of Cuba, of Puerto Rico, wait further orders. Go back one. Came another flash message. Go to Guantanamo Bay. So we were alongside in Guantanamo Bay when Cuba made his speech. And the speech basically, I think you all remember that, was the fact that there was hard photographic evidence that the Russians had tactical nuclear missiles operational in Cuba, which could threaten as far north in the United States up to Washington, D.C., and as far northwest to Dallas. I'm sorry, I can't read that at all now. You really messed it up.
You want me to read it?
Yeah,
The Bay of Pigs, in its own mismanaged way, has shaped John Kennedy's presidency. Now, listening to National Security Advisor Bundy, JFK is not nervous as he was in April 1961. He is not overwhelmed. Instead, he behaves like the President of the United States, a man who long ago stopped defining himself by party affiliation. Whatever happens next has nothing to do with being a Democrat or Republican, and everything to do with what's best for the American people. If anything shows how much JFK has grown since taking the oath of office, it is this resolve at this moment.
let me underscore that. Think back to the Bay of Pigs, the ineptitude, the screw-up, and so forth. This is a year and a half later. Look how much Kennedy had grown at that period of time, and to the point where he was now truly the leader of the free world. This is kind of an interesting picture. This was a get over here. Guantanamo Bay is down here. Everybody see this? Guantanamo Bay is at the far, which is a U.S. naval base in Cuba. Still there. Havanna's up here. Here's Miami. We had come to Guantanamo Bay when he made the speech. We got underway immediately, headed north, rendezvoused with the invasion fleet. And we're part of the destroyer screen for the invasion fleet for the landing. Up here shows where the missiles were. And here is the range of those tactical missiles. And look where it is. It basically as far north as Washington, D.C., as far west as Dallas. So those missiles were becoming operational when this all took place. This was the cover of Life magazine after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And on the cover of one of the ships, that's my ship right there. I was also the deck of that ship. That picture was taken. That's the USS Littlest, converted Buckley-class destroyer escort. If you notice that it has landing ship craft on the 01 level. There's 4, 2 on each side. and the after 5-inch mount has been removed, and the sides were raised, and they were raised because that's where we put the Marine Recon and the UDT. So we had a dual role. We were part of the destroyer screen, but we also would go in before the landing, drop the frogmen off, and they would do a beach survey. Then they'd pick them up, and then we'd come in and we'd anchor 1,000 yards off the shore and control the landing in. So we were part of the amphibious force to control the landing and handle the frogmen, but we were also part of the destroyer screen for the anti-submarine warfare. Well, it's really hard because I can't have a hard time seeing the screen. But here's the Guantanamo Bay. Here's the landing area. This is where the fleet was. And so we were there. The landing was scheduled about 36 hours out when it was finally called off. So the landing was on. And I can say that because I had the whole operations plan, because our ship would have controlled the landing in. And I was operations officer. This is what I was talking about before. That's where we went from Guantanamo, from Puerto Rico north to Guantanamo Bay, then went to join the invasion fleet. And at this point, the country was on DEFCON 4. DEFCON 5 is wartime. DEFCON 4 is deployed for war. So it was that close. That's when Kennedy made his speech. Think in terms of how Kennedy had grown from the mess before to the B-25 raids in Cuba, to how he handled the Cuban Missile Crisis. That all took place in about 14 months. So he had grown enormously in office over that period of time. Other things, back one. You went back two. Yeah. Other things that were going on at that time was, you all remember Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, Jack Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, and the rivalry with LBJ, all of them sitting in the White House together, which had to be kind of interesting. The Civil Rights Movement at the time, all the problems that were going on in the South, it was a very active time. Anybody remember that? This is in Vietnam, a Buddhist monk who sat down, poured gasoline over himself, and lit himself on fire in protest. That picture was on every front page of every newspaper in the world. Vietnam. Vietnam was in its infancy, and Kennedy's position was, first of all, he would deal with it after the 64 election. But what he did say beforehand, he had advisors over there, only advisors. But he said they'll be there just a short period of time and they'll be home by Christmas. So his plan was to disengage from Vietnam. And as he said privately, those people hate us, and they did. So what's the bottom line of all this is think of Kennedy in November of 63 versus Kennedy in 61. How he had grown. Where in 61 he was like a freshman in college. He didn't even know his way around the campus. In 63 he had grown to a point where he was in total control. The Secret Service loved the Kennedys, and the Kennedys loved them back. It was a very close relationship of mutual respect. In the public, 70% loved Kennedys, 30% hated their guts. So it was a real cross-section. LBJ. LBJ is now vice president. LBJ has an office in the White House. His office is way off in a corner. He's vice president, but in all essence, Bobby Kennedy, who is in essence acting as vice president. He's running the White House, not Johnson. Johnson's on the outside looking in. He's got no platform in the Senate now, which so he didn't really have any national platform at all. And John Connally is now governor of Texas, and the state really now belongs to John Connally, not to Lyndon Johnson. So here sits Lyndon Johnson in his White House office off in a corner. Kennedy has planned a trip to Dallas. Connally is flying in, the governor of Texas is flying into Washington to meet with Kennedy to plan the trip. Lyndon Johnson is not only not invited to that meeting, he isn't even aware that meeting is going to take place. So that gives you an idea of how far out of touch this point Lyndon Johnson was. He had been pushed way to the sidelines. He had an office in the White House, but he had no power. He had no knowledge of what was going on. He had no input. So the bottom line, and Lyndon Johnson knew this, that come 64, Kennedy didn't need him to carry Texas, so he wouldn't be on the ticket. And if he wasn't on the ticket then, the chances of him becoming president were virtually nil. We can all draw our own conclusions as to what, if any, impact that had on the future. This was in September of 1963, where Walter Cronkite was interviewing Jack Kennedy in Hyannisport. I think that's quite an interesting picture. But I'll read this, that the president, without consulting notes, rattled off a long list of statistics. He passed the tax cut to ward off the recession. He says, and he backs up the detailed financial specifics about the way in which cutting taxes would have stimulated the economy. Walter Cronkite and John Kennedy said goodbye. And on that perfect Labor Day afternoon, with the wind blowing off the Atlantic and the sun warming their faces, neither man can possibly know that it will be Cronkite who will appear on television in just 12 weeks to make the announcement that will shock the world. So Kennedy had really grown at this point. He had grown into a very significant figure. He was in control. Campaign trip to Dallas. And I'll read this again because this is key. The president will discuss the details of the trip with John Connally in the White House. And yet another confirmation that Lyndon Johnson has no place in Kennedy's future plans. The vice president has neither been invited to the meeting nor even told that it will take place. The Texan. That's how far out of picture, out of touch they were, and how separated they were. Dallas, Texas, November 1963. How many lived here then? Quite a few. Population, 750,000. Interestingly, 97% Protestant, overwhelmingly white and conservative. Right? How times have changed. But it's also the Jack Ruby's Dallas. And you see the Carousel Club there. So Dallas then had somewhat of a darker side as well, as all cities do. Lee Harvey Oswald, a ne'er-do-well, ex-Marine. He was a sharpshooter in the Marine Corps. Some say socialist, I would say communist. He emigrated to Russia, worked as a late operator in Minsk, had great expectations of becoming a factor. Turned out not to be the case. He met Marina Oswald there, married her, and came disillusioned back to the United States. He settled in Dallas, had a menial job at the Texas Book Depository. Wanted desperately to go to Cuba, but Castro rejected him. He didn't want him. So he was stuck in Dallas. Owned a mail-order rifle, and quote from the book, "Right now he's worse than a failure. He is anonymous." 24 years old, his wife and child had walked out on him. He's now all on his own. Very bright, but no advanced education. America didn't want him. Cuba didn't want him. Russia didn't want him. And yet he wanted to be a great, significant man. Now, who else was like that? John Wilkes Booth was like that as well. He wanted to be significant. Family gone, future non-existent, wants to be significant. Key point, didn't hate JFK. Opportunity to be significant. There's Dallas, Kennedy is coming to Dallas. Clear day, no bubble top on the car. Publicized route directly past the Texas Book Depository. Has a rifle and a scope, is an expert marksman. All cases for Oswald being a significant factor in the assassination. How many remember that day? Look at the joy on this, and look at the joy in the crowd greeting them. Look at the size of the crowd at the airport. Clearly, it was a very welcoming crowd. Here's the route. As you can see, it comes down, takes a right past the Texas Book Depository, and then down this way. The joy and warm crowds. First shot. There were 3 shots. Second shot. Got him in the neck. That's quite a picture. Basically, the back of Kennedy's head was blown apart with the 3rd shot. Has anybody seen that picture before? You see the second shot right through the neck. It doesn't show the back of the head because there's not much there anymore. I'll read this too. Your husband has sustained a fatal wound, the veteran surgeon said to the First Lady. I know, she replied. The President is dead. Jackie leans over and presses her cheek against Dr. Clark, the expression on her face of thanks. Kent Clark, a hard man who served in the Pacific in World War II, can't help himself. He breaks down and sobs. And who has to announce this? Walter Cronkite. Think back 12 weeks. This is a very interesting picture. This is the Secret Service loading the Kennedy's casket onto the plane. What this doesn't say is that the Dallas coroner refused to give the body up. He said the body has to stay here in Dallas and it has to be examined and so forth. So what did the Secret Service do? They drew their weapons and they took that casket at gunpoint and loaded it on the plane. This is a real dichotomy. Here's Lyndon Johnson taking the oath of office with Jackie Kennedy beside him. Kennedys and Johnsons despised each other. There was no love lost at all. Lyndon Johnson knew that he would not be on the ticket in 1964. And so with that, in all probability, his opportunity to be president would be over because Bobby Kennedy would be vice president. And then after Jackie's second term, in all likelihood, Bobby Kennedy would serve 2 terms as president. So it would be 16 years of Kennedy presidency. No Lyndon Johnson, no Richard Nixon, probably no Jimmy Carter. So in that context, think of how that one assassination literally changed the history of this country, even up to the point of today. That was very much a crossroads. Lee Harvey Oswald left the Texas Book Depository, went out, took a bus, and then got off the bus, took a cab back to his house down here. Got his pistol, left, walked down, and was confronted by J.D. Tippit, a police officer, who he shot and killed. He then ran into the theater, and he was arrested inside the theater. Was there a conspiracy? J. Edgar Hoover says yes. Bobby Kennedy says yes. The mob wanted the Kennedys out because Bobby Kennedy, they had courted the mob, Joe Kennedy had, and the mob had delivered Illinois for him. And when Bobby Kennedy became Secretary of the Treasury, he had the FBI go after the mob. So they became the enemy, and the mob felt that the Kennedys had really betrayed them because they were very key in getting Kennedys into the White House. We'll never know, really. Jack Ruby, who was terminally ill with cancer at the time, somehow got in with a pistol to get that close to Lee Harvey Oswald and shoot and kill him. Now, I found that quite ironic that he could possibly even get in there with a pistol, if he could possibly even get in there at all. But he did, and he shot and he killed Oswald. And this was before they had a chance to really interrogate Oswald. What did Oswald know? What didn't he know? What could he shed upon this? Did he act alone? Was he part of something larger? These are all questions that have never been addressed. They were probably addressed by the Warren Commission, but the Warren Commission to this day is sealed. So we really don't know. Did he act alone? Did he have help? It's a question with a great big question mark that's still there today and probably always will be. I think we can all remember where we were those days following. Everybody in the country was glued to their television set. young Kennedy is a tragic figure in himself. You can all remember, do you remember how he was killed? Chappaquiddick, where he was flying with his then fiancée. They were to leave early in the day, but the fiancee's sister couldn't make it until later in the day. So they took off from New York to fly out to the islands off of Cape Cod. And he was quite an amateur pilot at the time and not really instrument rated. And he ended up flying that plane in the middle of the night in the fog into the water, and all three of them were killed. We all remember that. Who hated the Kennedys? Quite a list. Lyndon Johnson did, because Lyndon Johnson knew he was the odd man out and he would never have a chance to be president if Jack Kennedy served a second term. Sam Giancana, who was the head of the mob, he felt betrayed by the Kennedys because he was very key in building Illinois for the Kennedys, getting them in the White House, and then Bobby Kennedy and the FBI turned on him. Allen Dulles, he felt that he bore the brunt of the Bay of Pigs invasion, and he felt it wasn't his fault. He felt it was Jack Kennedy's fault. Sinatra was part of the inner circle. All of a sudden, because of his mob connections, he was pushed to the side and was outside looking in. Castro, they had tried twice to attack and put him out of power, the Kennedys had, and they had failed twice. So he had an axe to grind. Khrushchev in the missile crisis, he was not a happy man. As far as J. Edgar Hoover, he was on the outside looking in, but he had little regard for the Kennedys as well. Hello? This was a December 1963 Life magazine cover of Jackie Kennedy. JFK listening to Camelot soundtrack before falling asleep, how he loved the final line. I'm almost done. If anybody wants to leave, you're welcome to. Don't let there be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot. That was Jackie's insistence that that be the theme. And then her quote was, "There'll never be another Camelot." And that remains today to be true. Millions of people come to visit that every year. Just quickly, and I touched on this before, 64, 68, what if there had been a second term with Bobby as VP? 68 to 76, Bobby as president, 16 years of the Kennedys. No Great Society, no LBJ, no Vietnam, maybe, no Watergate, no Jimmy Carter. So that really changed history. And that's it. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, do we send troops into Cuba to dismantle missiles or anything?
No, not to my knowledge.
From your story or anything?
No, I have no knowledge of that. I think I was involved, our ship was patrol the landing and I was operating.
So we didn't send any troops?
No. Had they been, it would have been the UDP. We did go in and do a peace. We did not go in.
Okay. Thank you, John. I do appreciate you. What?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
It was a negotiation.
Yeah. John, before you sit down, first of all, we'd like to thank you for being here today, and thank you for the good information.
Well, I'm sorry I ran over.
No,
No, good.
it was very good and very much appreciated. But we'll let Tom get us a camera. We have a little gift for you here. First of all, first of all, we would like to, in commemoration of your speech today, we'd like to present you a Liberty Bell, or you can use to keep the papers from blowing off your desk there. So, and then also a certificate of appreciation. So,
Well, thank you.
I need to date that. So, thank you. Let me take this for you. I'll hand it back to you.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
So I do appreciate that. So, and while we're talking about veteran issues, Mr. Fairburn, if you could join us, please. We just received this a few days ago, but there's a Korean Service Veteran Corps certificate that's being awarded to Jim Fairburn, I apologize for. Fairburn. Sorry about that. So you could turn here. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you for your service.
All right, I'll tell you one thing. I'm not sitting on a ship or anything. These gentlemen are. I was in the mud in a foxhole, and when it was raining like this, and the enemy was out there, you don't move. You stay there. So I know what really battle is.
John, if you could step back up here real quickly, please.
For the ones that you don't know me, I'm T.L. Holden, and I'm from the Edmund Terrell chapter up in Sherman. But one of the things that we're doing this year, along with the State Society, is recognizing our veterans that served during the Vietnam period. And for you history buffs, you can identify that because Tom put it in the newsletter this last month, that we're talking about anybody that served as a veteran in any of the branches from November 1st, 1955 through May 15th, 1975. So you did not have to be in country in Vietnam, but Congress in 2012 authorized a lapel pin to be presented to the veterans for their service in support of that conflict. So, John, we would like to present you your pin on behalf of the Texas Society.
I'll put it right up here.
Thank you. Okay. He's taking. Okay. And Mark, if I may, can I have it?
Yeah, yes, sir.
And since I'm already here with this, do we have anybody in the audience that has not received their lapel pin? If so, just stand up, I'll come to you.
We have a visitor here today.
Well, we've already got it. He said he's got a whole handful. Thank you, Dick.
Ken was a guest in Anne Hilton for almost 7 years, right?
6 years and 3 months, I don't like to.
Yeah, but who's counting?
you very much.
I'll go ahead and swear.
Okay. We do have a few officer reports I'd go through very quickly. First of all, I'm still working on the speaker for next month, so that will be announced here very quickly. Alan, Second Vice President report.
We've got most of them under control at this point, it looks like.
Yep.
We're going to pass out more citizenship medals this month. I may be calling on you.
Okay, very good.
Have anybody who is available to make a presentation, raise their hand so Alan sees.
Could y'all hear that? If you're available to help out on the presentation,
I suggest getting toward you.
yeah, so,
Okay.
okay. Okay, treasurer's report.
Normally, I don't give you a spoken treasurer's report, and today is going to be no different. For those of you who may have noticed or have heard, Ralph McDowell is not with us today for the first meeting of DALSAR in 27 years. He and his wife are in the hospital. I'm not sure what it is. Perhaps Tom Whitelock could tell us. But I hate to see a string of 27 years of perfect attendance in this chapter come to an end. There is a solution I'd like to propose to the chapter, and that is our hardworking historian Joseph Slonaker in the back room in here videotapes in its completeness every one of our meetings. He has this meeting captured on tape in sound and living color, and I would like to propose to the chapter that we offer to have Joseph go over and visit Ralph at his convenience, show him the hour-long video, and mark him up as having attended today's chapter meeting. Vice President, I'll turn it over to you to conduct the election if there is such a proposal.
I'm not sure that there's a vote required on it.
Well, this was my chance to catch him. But I spoke to him last night at length, and he felt embittered by the fact that he would not be here to sign the roster. I even offered to sign and forge his name, and he turned that down, so I guess out of goodness and in order to get into heaven, I will propose a motion that we accept.
Okay, all in favor? We have a second? All in favor, raise. We have a second. We do have a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes. Very good. I'm going to skip the registrar for just a second. Historian, Joe, anything to report?
I just want to remind everybody, you can go to YouTube and do a search for SAR Dallas chapter. And those meetings are posted there, as will this one.
So, very good. And Chaplain, anything to report?
I'm here.
You're here? Okay. That's a good report. So, very good. Back to call Jerry Pinkerton, please.
As I mentioned earlier, we have 9 inductees today, and because we have 9, we're going to split it into groups, because I don't think we can all get the 9 plus their family members around here. Certainly not for, if we had a real photographer, we might get everybody in, but Tom, you know. So anyway, so we have, this first group is Todd Martin and his sons, Benjamin, Joshua, and Luke, and his wife and their mother is going to pin them today. This is Lori. So we're going to go through the ceremony briefly, and then following this ceremony, we will, as they say, wash, rinse, and repeat. So, you want me to do this? You want to? Okay. I'm going to ask you a question. Having been accepted as a member of the Dallas chapter,
Raise your right hand.
Dallas chapter of the Texas Society, do you, as a descendant of one of the patriots and heroes of the American Revolution, reaffirm your ancestors' faith in the principles of liberty and our constitutional republic? Good. And will you pledge to support the patriotic, historical, and educational objectives of the National Society, Sons of the American Revolution? Good. So now, we're almost through with the pinning.
Almost, right.
So, what you have received is a rosette that is in the colors of George Washington's uniform, buff and blue. So, we congratulate you here on this acceptance and joining as joining the society. And have you elected who might want to speak about your ancestors? Sure, come on up.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Jerry, for helping make this happen. It's kind of a funny journey. It started 18 years ago, before my oldest son Luke, in the dark shirt here, was even born. I visited Luby's over on Mockingbird, and I think when the chapter used to meet over there. I didn't have my lineage in place, and it took years of internet research and working with my aunt, who actually had more of a passion for it than any of us. But through the years, we learned that Jacob Sewell, who is our patriot, was in the Rhode Island militia at the time of the Revolution. And an interesting fact about him is that he was actually the great-great-grandson of George Sewell, who came over on the Mayflower. And so this has been, it's just been a very meaningful trip back through history, and it's something that I was wanting to pass along to my kids as just part of our legacy. And now that my oldest son is 18, or he'll be 18 next week, he'll graduate high school, and it's something that hopefully they'll take with them the rest of their lives. And it's a birthday present for me too. Today's my birthday, so thank you.
With their certificates here.
Yes, and let's back you up to the flags over here.
Yeah, Mom, you need to
be in here.
I'm not part of the village.
You're part of the family.
There's a reason there's 3 of them.
Thank you, I'll take credit.
Okay, certificates at your chest, that's it. All right, now we'll get this. 2 of you are smiling. Now that Jerry is out of the picture, move into the picture. Thank you. A professional photographer. Congratulations.
Okay, I'm going to have to go back and get the next stack.
Yeah, this is a rather heavy day for us as far as inductions. So.
Well, it's a good day.
Yeah. The second iteration, we now have Jim McAlmont and Zach Watson and Tom McAlmont, who is a member of the Mississippi chapter. So these are our two new members that are joining us today. I'm going to give you your certificates at this time. So it'll be in the photo. And Tom is going to pin them, and I'm going to have him do the pledge while he's pinning this. So raise your hand, right hand. Having been accepted as a member of the Dallas chapter of the Texas Society of the Sons of the American Revolution, do you, as a descendant of one of the patriots and heroes of the American Revolution, reaffirm your ancestors' faith in the principles of liberty and our constitutional republic?
Absolutely.
And will you pledge to support the patriotic, historical, and educational objectives of the National Society Sons of the American Revolution? So I have now presented you with your certificates, and you have been pinned with your rosettes. As I said earlier, these are the colors of George Washington's uniform, and in the buff and the blue. So would one of you like to speak about your ancestors?
I think you're going to get a twofer on this one.
A twofer, good.
Yeah, twofer. My journey started in 1988. I got a phone call from a relative. I was working in Shreveport at the time, and growing up, we never knew any relatives, and I thought the name McAlmont was very odd. My family said, we have no one else. So I get a call from a guy named Glenn McCalman. The spelling has lots of varieties, I guess, along the way. And Glenn proceeded to tell me I was about as rare as crabgrass. So I attended one of the family reunions in 1991, and he presented us with a book, and it's about 1,000 pages. And I started looking through this book, and he had done an excellent job from me all the way down 8 generations back to Ireland. And the 6 generations back, I found John Arthur McAlmont, who served under Washington, actually for 7 years in Pennsylvania. And with that, we kind of got interested. And it took Grant the next 20-something years to actually, do all the research and get into the Sons of the American Revolution. I'd like for my son Zach to speak about it. He actually visited the gravesite at Thanksgiving last year.
Oh yeah, it was what me and my brother decided to do. We went up to Cross Creek, Pennsylvania, and visited a bunch of fallen soldiers, and it was incredible. It was real special to see those guys and actually see his tombstone and stuff, and him next to his wife. A lot of heritage there, a lot of special things. And one thing I'd like to say too is happy birthday to you, because it's also my birthday. So May 11th, guys. So.
I've had a few more than you, I think.
Thank you, Jim. Did you get all your pictures?
No, need to do one in front of the flag.
Front of the flag.
What chapter?
Central Mississippi.
Central Mississippi. That's great. Did all of you sign your sign-in sheet?
Yes, sir.
Huh?
Yes, sir.
You realize, of course, you can't get out without signing in.
That costs more on exit.
That's right. Zach gets a free exit because he helped out with the projector today.
Thanks, Kathy. Congratulations. Okay,
Zach is the new chairman of the technology committee.
and we still have more.
Yeah, and there's more.
we now have a dad who is a member and two sons who are new members, Tristan and Evan Scott, and Dad is pinning, and while he is pinning, I will ask you to raise your right hand. Having been accepted as a member of the Dallas chapter of the Texas Society of the Sons of the American Revolution, do you, as a descendant of one of the patriots and heroes of the American Revolution, reaffirm your ancestors' faith and the principles of liberty in our constitutional republic? I do. And will you pledge to support the patriotic, historical, and educational objectives of the National Society of Sons of the American Revolution? So I take great pleasure in presenting you with Tristan, your membership certificate, and you have been pinned with your rosette, and you know now the story of the rosette. The colors, George Washington's uniform above them. So congratulations to both of you. Congratulations, Dad.
Thank you.
So, welcome you all. Are you ready to pick it? Oh, I'm sorry. Which one's going to talk?
Guess it'll be me. Todd, you coached Tristan in baseball back in 6th grade, remember that? Yeah. I gave him a different patriot ancestor name is Captain Lieutenant Isaac Guyon, and he was came over from France. He was born here, of course his parents came over during the Huguenot changeover from France to the U.S. They settled in Westchester, New York. Captain Lieutenant Guyon was in Lamb's artillery, served in the Battle of Quebec, and through other various things, he eventually was sent down in 1797 to Natchez, where he planted the U.S. flag, claiming Mississippi, and he was, of course, under Thomas Jefferson, he claimed the Louisiana Purchase for the United States coming down from Memphis to Natchez. So, also, it's nice that we're also second cousins of George Washington and first cousins of President Polk. And being a Texan, that's a good thing. So, that's all we had.
Good. Thank you. He may be a professional when we get through with this much experience.
Yeah.
Okay, big smiles, that's it, looks pretty good.
Thank you.
We have one more.
You want to bring your... You want to go stand with us? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Glad to start working on yours now. Right, there you go. Okay, for the day. Are we ready? Ready. Okay. This is Will Fulton, and standing with him is his sister Molly, and a friend Larry. Lay, yeah. Anyway, Larry has sent his materials to me, so he will be standing before us hopefully in 4 to 6 months. So anyway, so you've seen the process. So let me ask you the question. Raise your right hand. Having been accepted as a member of the Dallas chapter of the Texas Society of the Sons of the American Revolution, do you, as a descendant of one of the patriots and heroes of the American Revolution, reaffirm your ancestors' faith and the principles of liberty and our constitutional republic?
Yes, I do.
And will you pledge to support the patriotic, historical, and educational objectives of the National Society of Sons of the American Revolution?
I do so pledge.
And so now you will be pinned.
Thank you.
Okay, and so as we mentioned before, the rosette is the official recognition emblem, and here is your certificate. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Let me get a shot of you there, and then you can come forward and talk. Okay,
Certainly.
who knows, you might.
Get one with me and one without.
Don't worry, I've moved you out.
You want to make a few comments?
Please, yeah, thank you.
Well, good morning. Our ancestor on our application is Robert Kilgore. Molly is probably better qualified to speak to this than I am, as she is the family researcher. Our uncle, our mother's brother, Duffield Smith, was a member of the SAR in Dallas and had done a lot of work. There have been some good family stories. Robert Kilgore was from Washington County, Virginia. We know little about him other than there was a Fort Kilgore, which we think was a fairly small facility that likely used for armaments and hiding away. Well, we got some more digging to do. We've got several other lines. I am tempted to tell you just a story from my childhood, which was my grandmother informing us that William Williams was an ancestor who signed the Declaration of Independence. And she said, now, you see, if you look at the Declaration, his signature is very small because he figured, you know, they might not win. Now, that was all a bit of a joke, but I've been a history buff since I was a little boy. I remember my grandmother giving me money for one book a month, and I would go up and get landmark biographies of American founding fathers, and I've continued to be very interested in history, and I'm glad to be associated.
I'm going to give a little more update. For the year to date, we have 7 new members in this year. Now, 5 of these that were inducted today, but due to scheduling conflicts, could have come in January, but they couldn't get here. So the first group and the last group would have been here 5 months ago. If we could, and we also have 7 that are in the pipeline, and that means that they're through me. They're either at Jerry Brown or at national office, and we have had 21 applications this year. So we are we're on a roll as to getting new members in. So.
Will you say anything about the challenge?
Other than do that,
you're going to talk about it.
Yes, our registrar is saying. Yeah.
Okay, now you're receiving a challenge coin from the Texas Society by compliments of the Dallas chapter. Now, this coin is significant in many ways. Because we had so many youth inducted today, I can't tell you the real reason the coin's there. But for the adults, make sure you have it in your pocket if you go into a bar. And for the younger members, make sure you have it in your pocket when you approach that for your allowance increase. Because with that challenge coin, if you have it and they don't, they lose. Okay? Basically, that's it, but it is something that you can be justly proud of, and hopefully you'll use it to good stead, and also as a memorabilia when you're talking to prospective members that you want to help them in the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Let's go quickly through the committee chairman reports. Unfortunately, Ralph McDowell is not, is that who we have coming in? Just in time for his committee report, we'd like to welcome Matt and Ralph.
I don't really, what's the question you want me to give?
This be your membership report.
No, what?
Yeah, first off,
Report on Jeannie.
Yeah,
Has she been better? Yeah.
How about on
you?
She'll be discharged today.
Good. Will you be?
I'm getting better.
Good.
We gotta do treasurer, new secretary. Things are slow. So, I'm gonna guess. Our active membership is about 252. Hope we can get more mock pays to pay. But, we need to be patient. Students got that. Don't come here in trouble, you. I keep might get that certificate. But
Believe it or not, it's being constructed. I'll have to get it into your hands. Do you know the date?
yeah, it's like a couple of weeks.
Couple weeks, okay. Alan, you're safe for a while.
So, I was ready to break my perfect attendance record, but now that I'm here, I'm gonna smile. Hopefully I'll get another.
There's only one individual in this room that's happy that you're signing.
How you get?
I said, there's only one individual that's happy that you're signing that sheet.
Who's that?
That's Joseph, because we voted that he would come to the hospital and show you the tape of the meeting so that you could sign off.
Well, look, I feel like I'm causing a problem here.
Okay, they got back to the hospital and you'll come to the office.
What else? That it? So my certificate's not ready,
Not ready for you.
and we don't know of the other school.
And you haven't heard from them or called, the other schools haven't notified.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt your meeting now. Get on with it, Mark.
we're glad you made it. John Martin, before you leave the room, if you quit, okay.
The VA report, especially the new members, we take stuff to the VA, personal items, games, coffee. We need to do, quite honestly, as a chapter, we need to do better than that. We're not getting as much participation as I'd hoped we would. So if you all would be so kind, old members, new members, when you come, bring some stuff to the vets. And what I do is every month take it down and we give it to the vets. James, you have anything to add to that? James is on the chairmanship of the VA, has been for years. You got anything to add, James?
No, I don't have anything. I think you covered it all. It's just primarily if we could get some more coffee, because they have a card that goes around while people are there waiting to see the doctor, and they give us free coffee, and they use a lot of it.
Okay, very good, thank you. Marshall Scanlon?
Why don't you go ahead since you were there?
Okay.
Take your time.
Okay, we had, at the conclusion of the brochure contest, we had we had 5 students from Reiner Arts Academy down in South Dallas who had submitted brochures. One young lady ended up winning second in state, and 4 were declared as runners-up. So, 2 weeks ago, I believe, we went to present certificates and awards to them. The young lady who won received a check for $200, and each of the runners-up got checks for $25 each. So it was a very nice The color guard was there, so it was a very nice ceremony and a chance to explain a little bit about the different flags that were used and have a little history lesson with them. And I think the kids were all very appreciative, especially the young lady who got $200. So, thank you, but did a great job on that one. So, color guard, Robert Kittrell. Sure. Yeah, what's your?
The color guard is still alive and well, and this is really one of our high point of the season for the color guard. We're involved in a heck of a lot of activities. It could be funerals, parades, and we interact with all the other chapters in North Texas. We're not just the color guard of Dallas, chapter. So we'll have a parade at, well, it's kicking back in.
I know, yes.
We're having
that back a little bit.
Yeah.
I can't figure out how to turn it down.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just for the parades alone, we have, starting with Ennis, May the 25th, we have the Polka Festival Parade. Come June, the 15th, this is not a parade, but it's a flag retirement ceremony at the Plano Fire Station. And that's a big event. Starting at 11. On June the 22nd, the Audie Murphy Parade in Farmersville, muster by 9 a.m. So that's just really a brief agenda for the coming activities of the SAR. Okay?
Bob,
Yeah.
also you have grave marking for past president, state president,
Bellamy.
Chester, Dorchester, next Saturday, 2 o'clock in Sherman.
And who's Bellamy?
No.
Dorchester, okay. I know there's another, East Park Trinity has a funeral, for Bellamy. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I guess as part of the color guard, Jerry Pinkerton and I had a chance to go out to West Texas to a small town called Winters, Texas, between Abilene and San Angelo. The remains of a World War II sailor who was on the USS Oklahoma at Pearl Harbor had been recently identified, and they had a memorial service for him last Saturday. So Jerry and I went in uniform and were part of the memorial service for him. The Navy did just an absolutely outstanding job of the presentation and the way they handled the service. So it was well worth the drive. So I believe that's CAR events. Nick Harper. Nick, do you have anything for CAR? Okay. Bradley Sue is pretty smart not to get out today on a motorcycle. So, is there any other old business to discuss? Real quickly on new business, Tom, if you'd like to talk about the 90th chapter anniversary.
Don't have anything. The advisory committee hasn't met to work on some of the ideas that we have floating around. I do have one thing for new business. Because of the passing of Lonnie Montego, who is our webmaster, we are going to convert the website to another serving group and a template from
there'll be, I'm sure, much more news about that in coming months. So, one other event coming up. It's not actually an SAR event, but maybe of some interest. Highland Park United Methodist Church, along with SMU Library, conducts periodic author reviews, book reviews. On May 23rd, which is Thursday night, at Highland Park United Methodist, Rick Atkinson, who has written a trilogy of books about the Revolution, is coming to talk about the first book in that series called The British Are Coming. It's at 7 o'clock that evening. It's a free event to attend. So, Tom, I'll get you some information about that for the newsletter and stuff. But in case you're available for it, that will be a good time to hear the author in person talk about this book. So, okay. I think it's time for the drawing here.
Your time, it's my time.
Yeah, so.
Don't go away. You're going to do the drawing.
Visitors, if you have your tickets. The protocol here is on the registration table in the back. There are a set of books. If your number is called, go back and pick one up.
Okay.
All right. Okay. I'm just going to call out the last three digits. 694. We have a winner. Okay.
You won last one.
Here. All right. Okay, 691. You can award it to somebody if you would like. So. Yeah, good idea. Yeah, go back and choose you something. 699.
Well, when you know.
Yeah. It is, okay, 713. 713. Okay, good. One of our new members here, and for your birthday, that's your. All right. 705. Okay. There we go. 700. And we have one more. All right. How about 686? Claim 686. All right. How about 688? Nobody wants that last one. 689. All right. And that's it? Okay, Chaplain Pounders, if you could lead us in the benediction, please. Everyone would rise.
Join me. As we leave here, God, we leave with the conviction that you are where we should be, in our heart, in our mind, and in our body. And yet we know that we need to do more, each of us, to bring your kingdom into this earth, to bring the kingdom of your God, your kingdom into our own heart and in the hearts of all others, so that freedom and liberty and law will always reign upon this country. In the name of the Christ, amen.
Amen. Okay, the SAR recessional, Then, let us remember our obligations to our forefathers who gave us our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, an independent Supreme Court, and a nation of free men. We are dismissed.
That works, do you have my record?
Yes.